What's the best PC for video editing? Well, we just got a whole new desktop PC setup, and in this video we're going to show you exactly what we're running, why we upgraded, so that you can make the right call when deciding on the best video editing PC for you. Hey, it's Justin Brown here from Primal Video, where we help entrepreneurs and business owners amplify their business and brand with video. If you're new here, then make sure you click that subscribe button, and all the links to everything we mentioned in this video, you can find linked in the description box below. So let's jump into it. Now, a lot of you already know that I primarily use a mix of Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere for all our editing work. That means I'm using a Mac for some work, but because Premiere is a lot more resource hungry, we also use a PC for our Premiere projects. If you're interested in how both of these platforms compare, I'll link a video up in the cards that compares our new desktop PC that we're about to review here against my older MacBook Pro and the sorts of projects that I use for each. We've done a couple of videos now talking about our new video editing system that MSI sent us out. So in this video, I'm going to talk through in more depth about the gear, talk through everything that we've got in there, all the good stuff, all the bad stuff, the things I like and the things that I don't like. So it's going to be a review of that system, but we're also going to help you decide what the best parts and best setup is for your video editing system. So this is the system here. They've done a great job speccing it up themselves with some awesome parts that we would normally choose and some others that we would probably tweak specifically for video editing. So let's jump in and take a look at what's inside. The CPU is an Intel Core i7-8700K processor, which has a clock speed of 3.7 GHz, which will boost up to 4.7 GHz, and it's the 6-core model. So currently that's one of the latest higher end CPUs available. Memory wise, we've got 4 8GB sticks, so 32 GB of RAM in this system of Kingston DDR4 RAM clocked at 3000 MHz. The motherboard is an MSI Z370 SLI Plus motherboard. The video card or GPU is an MSI NVIDIA GTX 1080 with 8 GB of GDDR5 memory. So a really powerful video card. Storage wise, there's 2 drives in this system. The first is a 256 gig Intel SSD drive, and the second is a 4 TB Seagate Barracuda Pro hard drive. So you've got your SSD for your operating system and your programs, and you've got a larger 4 TB drive for your video files. To keep the CPU nice and cool when it's under load, this thing has water cooling, and the water cooling kit is a Cooler Master Master Liquid 240. The power supply in this system is a Cooler Master V750, so it's the 750 watt power supply. And the case that's holding everything together is a Cooler Master Case H500P. And surprisingly, even with these 2 giant fans on the front and the additional fans inside, and the fans on the water cooling as well, this system is almost silent. It is crazy quiet. Okay, so that's what's inside the system. Now let's jump across and see how this works for video editing and take a look at a couple of benchmarks. For those of you that are interested, we did run a Cinebench test, and on the OpenGL test, it scored 130.58 frames per second. The CPU score was 1,399, and the CPU single core score was 183. So if you're not sure what all of that means, these are some very decent results for this Cinebench test. So now with some real world video editing benchmarks to give you an idea on the power of this system and how it changes between Adobe Premiere and Davinci Resolve on this system, we created a 4K timeline. We imported 4 4K video files and stacked them on top of one another. We then resized them all down so that all 4 of them would fit on the screen at once. To make sure we were putting the system under load, we also reversed 2 of those clips. We then applied a basic curves adjustment or basic color correction to all 4 clips, and we also applied a LUT to the entire project. So this 20-second 4K video editing project is something that's definitely going to put your editing system under load. So just hitting play on this timeline in Adobe Premiere, this thing played back seamlessly with the quality set to full. We could scrub through it, no worries, and there was minimal lag or delay in working with this project on this system. We then took that same project file into Davinci Resolve to see how it fared there as well. The overall performance was nothing like it was in Adobe Premiere. Just hitting play on the timeline, we were only able to get around 10 frames per second playback, where it's a 25 frames per second project. So it was stuttery playback. Scrubbing through the timeline was really stuttery and really jittery as well, and it would frustrate you working in this project on this system with everything set to max. But don't worry, because that was our intention, was to create something that was going to put these systems under load, and then we would test the render or the export to see how they went. So we did an export of these timelines from both Adobe Premiere and Davinci Resolve to an H.264 4K video file at around 40 megabits per second. And Adobe Premiere took 3 minutes 14 seconds to perform the export, and Davinci Resolve took 36 seconds. So while the overall timeline and editing performance inside of Adobe Premiere was much better than Davinci Resolve for this crazy project, Davinci Resolve actually exported much faster. And that really just shows you that the software that you're using to edit your videos, whether it is Premiere, whether it is Resolve, or any other application, you really want to look at what your video editing software will utilize from your system and tailor your system around the editing software as well. So in this case here, Davinci Resolve on the export was sitting around 70% GPU or video card usage, whereas Adobe Premiere was sitting around 30%, but it would drop down to around 10%, then back to 30. So it really wasn't utilizing the video card anywhere near as much as Davinci Resolve. So putting that crazy 4K timeline to the side, how does this system perform for real world video editing? Well, I've been using this system now for the last few weeks, and I've got to say it is an absolute beast. It's just cutting through the 4K edits that we've been doing. The render times are insane. I've only had to drop the quality of the playback in Adobe Premiere from full to half on one project, but even then it was still more than usable, leaving it at full playback quality. Every now and then I still like to drop the quality back to half just to get that extra little performance boost when you're working on a really complicated timeline, but it's definitely not required on this system. So even for editing down these YouTube videos, we use a mix of Final Cut and Adobe Premiere, depending on if we're working with external editors or not. I really like the way that you can work with external editors on Adobe Premiere versus the workflow in Final Cut. So if I got an editing project back from one of our editors in Adobe Premiere and I had to make a minor change to it on my Mac in Adobe Premiere, it could take up to around 2 hours to save out a 15-minute 4K video file just for YouTube. On average now in Adobe Premiere on this beast of a Windows system, the export times are all down around 7 minutes. So from around 2 hours to around 7 minutes is just crazy. But one thing I thought was really interesting was checking out the component usage while we were editing and while we were rendering videos out to see what components were actually being used and to what extent. And really there's 4 key components when it comes to video editing and video rendering that give you the performance. So just seeing what the usage is across the board and across those 4 components, you can start to work out where your bottlenecks are and where you really should be spending your money to improve performance for your video editing. So those 4 components are your CPU, your RAM, your video card, and your hard drive. So while we're doing a 4K video export in Adobe Premiere Pro, the CPU usage is up around 100%. It fluctuates between 80 and 100, but in most cases it's up around 95 to 100% CPU usage. So in the case of our system here, means that that is the bottleneck in our system. Now, it's definitely not a low spec CPU. This is a high-end CPU. It's one of the latest CPUs out there. But the 2 main factors to consider when you're looking at a CPU is the clock speed, so how fast it is. This one's a 3.7 gigahertz, but it will boost up to 4.7 gigahertz, and also the amount of cores that the CPU has. So this one is a 6 core, but you can also get an 8 core, 10 core, 12 core. You can get crazy with them, and that helps improve the performance as well. But again, it still depends on what video editing software you're using as well. So you need video editing software that's going to make use of those extra cores to give you that performance. And on the CPU front, you've actually got 2 main choices. You've got Intel, which is what we've got, or you've got AMD. So AMD have just released their new range of Ryzen CPUs. So they are apparently really good for gaming. But from all our testing and from what we've seen online as well, my preference is to stick with the Intel CPUs for now anyway. We'd probably look at upgrading the CPU at some point because that was the bottleneck for us. So what I would recommend there, if you're on a tight budget, look at an Intel Core i3 or an i5 processor. If you've got a bit more to spend, then look at an i7 or maybe even an i9 processor. So spend the biggest amount of your budget on your CPU and get a decent CPU. So the RAM usage in this system with some of the exports we did was also getting up around that 30 gig mark as well, which having 32 gig of RAM in the system can make that part of the bottleneck as well? Well, I'm definitely going to add in some extra RAM. I think 32 gig of RAM is nice, but ideally I'd like to have 64 gig of RAM in there just to have that extra headroom while I'm editing with multiple applications open, and just to sort of future-proof it as well. But it really comes down to the type of video editing projects and how complicated they are as to whether you're going to use 64 gig of RAM, 32, or even 16 for that matter. But it is a case of the more the merrier when it comes to RAM. The more you have, the more headroom you have to be able to have even things like multiple applications open at the same time, which is a big one for us. Typically, when we're editing in Adobe Premiere, we'll also likely have Adobe After Effects open and sometimes Photoshop open as well, moving the files and tweaking everything between the different applications. So having enough RAM to have smooth performance while you've got multiple applications like that open is a huge thing as well. So this motherboard has 4 RAM slots on it, meaning we can run 4 sticks of RAM in this system. And that's exactly what we've got. We've got 4 8 gig sticks totaling 32 gig. Now, while you do get better performance actually running with 4 sticks of RAM instead of one 32 gig stick or 2 16 gig sticks to give you the same amount of RAM, the issue with having 4 sticks and maxing out those slots is that upgradability down the track becomes a bit of a nightmare, because instead of just adding additional sticks in, we've now got to replace the 4 sticks that are there with new sticks to be able to increase to 64 gig of RAM. So it's not something that's a deal breaker by any means, but just be aware, if you're going to be upgrading your RAM in the near future, then maybe consider going 2 sticks of RAM and leaving 2 slots free so that you've got that ability to easily upgrade and add more RAM down the track without needing to replace all 4 sticks of RAM. But you also want to get the most amount of RAM that you can. I would recommend at a minimum 16 gig of RAM, but probably 32 would be a good amount to start with if you're serious about your video editing, and obviously if you've got the budget to go along with it. Now, there's actually one more cool feature on this board, and it's called DDR4 boost technology. It's to do with your RAM. The RAM that's in this system is DDR4. So what this does, or what it says it does, is it helps the reliability and the performance of your RAM by removing any interference with other components on the motherboard. Now, this is something that's pretty hard to test as to whether it does its job or not, but the fact that it's there and the fact that it is recognized as a problem, and working in IT and working in computer shops for years, RAM is a big factor in a lot of people's hardware issues and blue screens and systems crashing and reliability. And we plan to leave this thing on almost 24/7. So if it does what it says it does and gives you more performance out of your RAM and helps make your system more stable and reliable, then that's an awesome feature. The video card, or the GPU in this system, being the MSI NVIDIA GTX 1080, the 8 gig model, is insane. It's an amazing gaming video card. But seeing the amount of usage that we were getting for video editing at a maximum has peaked at 70% usage. On average, on an export, it's fluctuating between 14% and 30%. So it's getting nowhere near the 100% capacity of using the whole power of this video card. So while I love this video card and it would be awesome for any VR stuff or any gaming, be amazing for that, for video editing and for Adobe Premiere, it's probably a little bit of overkill, and you could definitely get away with something maybe more mid-range, or the model before it, something like the GTX 1070, and use that money that you've saved on the video card for either getting more RAM or for getting a faster processor. Even if then on that card the GPU usage was more like 60 to 80%, it's still not going to be using the full capacity of that card, in which case it's not a bottleneck for your performance. And the last thing to consider is your storage, or your drives, or specifically the speed of your drives. If you've got really slow hard drives in your system, then that can become the bottleneck, because your system isn't able to read the video files off those drives or be able to write them back to the drives fast enough, in which case your processor, your RAM, and your video card aren't ever going to get to their maximum usage, because the hard drive then would be the bottleneck. So in our case here, using the SSD, but also using a video optimized hard drive like the Seagate Barracuda Pro drives, we haven't really come close to maxing this out. The highest usage I've seen it is around 75 megabytes per second, which I know that the speeds that I'm able to pull on these drives is much, much higher than 75. So no bottleneck there. This motherboard's also got two M2 slots, which is the slot that your SSD goes into. So having the second slot means that you can actually plug in a second SSD and get even more performance for your video editing. So the primary SSD is used for your operating system, your Windows and your programs. You can add a second SSD to speed up and use as a cache or temporary storage drive, so that whatever video editing project you're working on, you've got fast access to those files between the SSD that they're stored on and the primary SSD, the program drive as well. So that can make a huge difference to your video editing performance. And what this board also supports, if you want to take this up a notch again, is you can actually RAID these two SSD slots. So essentially you can pair them together and almost double the performance of your SSD by connecting the two together and making one big SSD. So that is crazy. It's also got 6 SATA ports, so having the ability to plug a heap of extra hard drives into here, especially for a video editing system where video files are huge and you want to have the flexibility of adding extra drives and upgrading your drives all the time, then that for me is a big feature and something that I look out for. I'm also going to swap out the 4TB drive and probably put two 10TB drives in. I mean, we're currently working on one editing project for a client and we're already over 9 terabytes of footage. So the 4TB drive just means that currently we're using external drives to be able to manage that. So having a couple of 10TB drives in there is going to help us with a bit of that flexibility. And we may even RAID the two together to get extra performance with the drives that way. So whether you're editing videos or playing games, to get the most power or performance out of your system, you want to remove as many of these bottlenecks as you can. And that's where spending money on things like a faster CPU or more RAM or a new video card, wherever the bottleneck is for you, improving just that piece will give you greater performance until something else is the bottleneck. So it's all about removing or limiting these bottlenecks in performance to the best that you can. And normally this is going to be driven by your budget. And there's two more really important pieces of the puzzle when you're looking at a video editing system. The first one is your main board, and the second one is your case. So the first one, your motherboard, there's some really crazy motherboards out there at the moment, some of them that are set up for full overclocking for gaming and all of that stuff that really doesn't play much of a role in video editing. So the things that you want to look for when you're looking at a motherboard for video editing is that it has all the ports and connectivity that you need or may need into the future. Just look for one that has the right amount of RAM slots for you if you're looking for something upgradable, whether it's 2 slots, 4 slots, or additional SATA ports inside your computer so that you can add additional hard drives. What I really like about this one is the upgradability and flexibility that you get based on all the ports and connections that it has. So for example, it's got 2 USB 3.1 generation 2 ports. So they're the really fast one. One of those is actually a USB-C port. It's got 8 USB 3.1 generation 1 ports. And it's also got 6 USB 2 ports as well. So for some people that definitely could be overkill. But if you're looking at those USB 3.1 ports and you're wanting the ability to plug in the latest, fastest hard drives into your system and get the most performance out of them, then those are the sorts of things you should be looking for. Just to give you an idea, we're currently using 6 of the USB ports up already. And that's just for webcams, it's for keyboard, mouse, that's for a couple of external hard drives. So you can fill it up pretty quick. So you want to make sure that you've got enough so that you don't have to go out and rely on things like USB hubs to be able to get those extra ports that you need. And the last thing is your computer case. Now for us, a requirement with the computer case was that the case is quiet. Now it may sound silly, but this system is sitting right next to the camera here now, and it's going to be running, as I said, almost 24/7. So we want it to be quiet because we will be filming in this room and no one wants a really loud system. I always remember making these really powerful gaming systems for clients, but in order to keep them cool, they had to have these huge fans on them that were just so noisy, they sounded like a vacuum cleaner. So having a silent system or a really, really quiet system was a key factor for us, especially filming in this room. So the 2 big fans on the front of this case help keep everything cool and they don't make much noise, and the water cooling on top of the CPU instead of using a big CPU fan has made this thing almost silent. And I was so surprised when I saw the size of the water cooling kit. They used to be so big and so clunky and take so long to set up, but these days they're so easy to install, they're much, much smaller and they're pretty well silent as well. And I guess I should note at this point that it actually does a really good job of cooling the CPU as well. Even running all these tests and benchmarks and really putting the system under a heap of load, the highest temperature that we've recorded is 72 degrees Celsius, which is way below the threshold of what this CPU can handle. So the water cooling, it definitely works. And with your case, you also want to make sure that you've got enough storage capability. So this particular case will actually only hold two 3.5-inch drives, the bigger hard drives, and will also hold two SSDs as well. So if I want to add a heap of extra hard drives, I'd probably have to look at updating the case to something that will hold more. So it's definitely worth considering when you're purchasing your case to see how many drives you can hold. And again, try to work out how many you might want to use into the future as well. Because only having the ability to hold two hard drives, two 3.5-inch hard drives, is pretty limiting when it comes to a video editing system. And you also want to make sure that it is easy to work inside your case and to add things in, because some of the cases you may need to remove components, remove video cards, remove your RAM to be able to add in things like a hard drive, which really should just be a simple thing. Plug it in and you're good to go. So a couple of things to be aware of when you're looking at your case. So overall, I'm really loving this thing so far. I don't really know why we held out so long to upgrade it. It's completely leveled up my Adobe Premiere workflow. You've seen how much time it's saving us for our videos, and it is so smooth and awesome to edit on. But with that said, Final Cut is still a big part of what we do, and the amount of work that we do in Final Cut only seems to be increasing every year. So I think next we might try to set this thing up as a Hackintosh, and I think that could be a really cool test to see how that compares. But even for just editing in Adobe Premiere right now, as it is, this thing is amazing. So if you're in the market for your own desktop PC for video editing right now, we put together a quick video running through the top 5 things to look out for to maximize video editing performance. Check out the link on screen now, and I'll see you soon.